Hey everyone, and welcome back to the course. So in this episode, we're going to be focusing on creating the masks that we can then use to texture our terrain inside of Gaea. So there's quite a lot of nodes that we can use to achieve this, and I'm going to showcase you the ones that I tend to use, and this will be a demonstration of how I would kind of create the splat maps or weight maps for this terrain and then use those to texture it inside Gaea. So let's jump straight right into this. We have some data maps and we also have some selectors. And to start with, we'll use a selector to basically logic-based, like mathematics of the terrain, so we can calculate the slope of our terrain. If I just plug that in, you'll see instantly we have a black and white preview on our terrain, and what this is showing us is whatever's white is being masked out, and we could use this to apply, say, a sand material just in these white areas, and I can play around with the min slope and max slope. So at the moment it's between 0 degrees and 16 degrees, and vice versa. If I put this to 90 and say 60, I can use that to calculate just the cliffs of my terrain. So what we're going to do is actually calculate between 70 and 90 to get the cliffs, and we can just name this cliff mask, and you can double click the node to bring up the rename option. And then we're also going to use the slope node to calculate everything other than the cliff. So between 0 and say 40, we'll just drop that there, and we'll add a bit of fall off so this blends a bit better. And we'll leave that as slope. Also, now we can take a look at some of the data maps as well and see what we can get. So we'll start with maybe soil. And really what I'm trying to do is just create maybe 4 to 5 different maps that we can use to blend different materials on top. And soil is actually giving us a good start. I can enable graded, press the padlock, and just start playing with this to get a value that, or a map that looks quite interesting. And let's also try dither. I'm not sure what dither does actually. Okay, so we're not going to use dither, but you can see we have some interesting masks depending on your needs. Let's try protrusion. And really it's just finding a combination of 4 to 5 that you think might be useful. So this could be good for the higher peaks of our terrain. Get some highlights on the, I guess, the canyon peaks. And then we'll also grab, let's do texture. And the nice thing is, again, if I change the height map, then all of these will update with the same values. So realistically, once this is set up, I could plug in a different terrain and I should have a completely new terrain that's textured accordingly. So for texture, let's just change some of these values. We'll change the slope. And you can see I'm pretty much just changing numbers until I see something that I think will work for the texturing process. Depending on what this gives us, then we could maybe start with just colorizing some of the terrain. And you can see the texture node, even at 0.5K, takes a bit of time, even with my rig, to finish compiling. Cool, so this could be interesting, and let's just reduce the patches amount. Here we have a color section, and one of my favorite nodes inside Gaea is the sat maps. I think this is one of the best ways to just quickly preview a terrain, and we have 2 inputs. So we have the input, which is obviously we're going to just test it out on the soil node. And you can see instantly it's applied a range of colors on our terrain. And how this node works is it takes the black and white image that we have here, and based on the values, it will just apply one of these gradients. I can scroll through and just randomly select something until I find a palette that works for me. If I don't like any of these, then I can come to the library and just try sandy, green, colorful, legacy. But let's go for sandy. Maybe something without too much color information. But I mean, you can already see just how quick it is to get a really good example of what your terrain might look like, and it doesn't take much time at all. So I'll probably go for something like this, and then we have some post-processing, so we can input auto levels or a bit of clarity as well. Also, what I would normally do is just build up these sat maps and then mix them together. So if we just take this sat map here, much like we could do in a Substance Designer, for example, just blending different height maps, and we'll pick something that looks pretty obvious. This works well. And then I'll take the mixer node. So I'd say let's mix this one and this one. And I just want this to be applied on the ground area of this mask, like this. Cool. And you can see we just need to swap these around. So rather than unplugging them in, we can just do swap inputs. Cool. So now you see we've got this green color on the slope areas. We've also put this sat map here. And if I just pin this node by pressing F, I can just come back to this sat map and change this color until I find something that I think looks interesting. So we go with that, and then we can change this one to not be so green. Let's go back to sandy and just pick a sand-like texture. Maybe something with a bit more orange, like this. And you can see it's actually not updating anymore, which is a shame. So we're going to just force a refresh of the entire node network. And while it's doing that, so normally what I do is just try some of the data maps or selectors that I like, build up a library of masks, and then simply just layer those on the terrain and apply and basically blend different color variations either through stat maps or one of these other color nodes that are available. Cool. Okay, now you can clearly see that everything is stopped working, so I'm going to do a hard crash and reload the file. Hey everyone, we're back. So I just reloaded the project and changed. You can see that the color values have now updated. So if we just pin this node, we can simply just cycle through these colors until we find something that we think works with our terrain. And I actually quite like what we have here. So very similar to Substance Designer, we have our, the material we're blending, the background, and the mask that we're using. And from here, I would just continue doing the same thing. So let's grab another sat map. We'll plug that into our protrusion. We'll need another mixer. And for this, we're going to put the input 2 as the background. We'll plug the new sat map, and then we'll plug the protrusion in the mask. And if I just press F to now pin there, you can see that this protrusion is kind of working here, and then we've got this sat map. And if I try to really see where this is using this color, it's going to be a bit difficult. So what I like to do is put a extreme color on the section that I'm actually working on. And if I just put that there, you can see it's kind of applied everywhere. So if we swap inputs, and that should be right now. There we go. Okay, so it's the other way around this. The top one is the one that's blended. No, input 2 is the one that's blended, sorry. My apologies. So just to recap, input, the first one is the background. Input 2 is the one that's being blended. So it's the opposite of Substance Designer. So now you see we have a bit of color variation. And if we just pin that by pressing F, and now we can cycle through and get something that will work on our terrain. This looks very rocky. And then the next step is let's work on the texture node. And that's just building. So rather than just applying this across our whole terrain, what we can do is take our cliff mask and simply plug this in here. And what it's going to do is act as a mask for this, and now we just need to invert. And the reason I'm doing this is so that the color that is going to be applied for a mixer here won't affect the rest of the terrain. We don't really want this section to work on the cliffs, for example. I think they're already working perfectly fine. And you can see we've broken this again. Open that we've pinned. Yeah, I think the colorization on the cliff side is fine, but the rest needs a bit more variation. So we've built this. And what we've done here is just taken the cliff mask, inverted it, and then use that as an alpha. So let's just move all of this there. And then we can put those here and keep things clean and organized. Cool, so now we can continue on. We'll use the sat map. And then we'll just copy paste the mixer. And we'll put input 1 as the previous one, input 2 will be this, and then our texture will be the mask. And you can see it's very noisy at this moment, and that's because we have this extremely noisy gradient. But if we pick something with a bit of sand variation, maybe something like this could work well. We'll just see what it looks like. Let's pin the final output, and we'll just cycle through this until we find something that we are happy with. Cool, so you can see we've broken the viewport again. Okay, and we're back. So, I mean, you can see there are a few bugs with the software. From here, we can actually use a new node, which I often don't really use. I prefer keeping things correct at the origin. But we have this color FX node. Essentially all of the Photoshop adjustments options in one node. So we have hue, saturation, lightness, we have brightness and contrast, auto levels, clarity, noise, etc. And for this one, I'm just going to play with the saturation and lightness, I think. Hopefully it hasn't broken again. Okay, it has. So again, extremely buggy. We're going to restart once more. Hey everyone, and we're back. So we're just taking a quick look at the color effects node, which has all of the adjustments that we can use. We found a good gradient for the stat map, so now we can just apply the HSL and use this to manipulate and update the color values. And now we have a cliff that feels a bit more natural, in my opinion, something that looks like this. And then here we can just start working on this material as well. So really it's a lot of like just changing and layering different color values until you find something that works. We're going to go to sand it, but for tutorial purposes, we're going to just leave it at this now. Cool, so this is how we build the masks, apply some basic colors, and then use some mixing options. There's 3 other nodes that I just wanted to show you, and the first one is the synth node. So what synth does is we can take our soil, for example, and plug that in. And we have a bitmap option here, so what we can do is use an image such as this soil, this clay. If I just open that, it's going to build our own sat map or synth gradient based on the image, and I can increase the amount of steps that this has to get more color inputs, or we can reduce it, we can add some more fuzziness. So this is a great way, depending on your image, you can build your own sort of colorization. Super useful node if you don't really want to use the sat maps. I'm just going to remove that one. The next node is actually the vegetation. So again, we can use, well, we didn't want to do that. So we can plug soil, for example, here. No, we can plug the color here, and then the soil is our height. Bear with me. So for this vegetation node to work, we need to plug an input, which is our sat map, and then the height is going to be our height map. So what we're basically doing is taking this color and then using the height map and just adding vegetation based on some options. So let's just pick a color that works quite well, maybe this, and then we can play around with the influences, so the amount of chaos, the slope of the bottom, and also the top. So much like the slope option we had earlier, we can use this to apply some vegetation, and then we can use an override and plug that in if we wanted to. And we can say use the override map instead. And what that'll do is use this color inside the vegetation. So this one works on rules, you know, where vegetation would likely grow. Pretty useful for, I guess you could say, placing like some basic moss or something on your terrain. If I just disable this, we'll go back to this color. So that's the vegetation. And then the last one, which I haven't used too much, only a handful of times, is the biome node. So visualization is going to be our height map actually, which I want to plug here. We'll plug that there. And then for the input, we're just going to take our slope. Something like this. Actually, we won't want, actually we'll keep the influence. So the biome is kind of like a multi-tiered colorization node. We can allow highlands, midlands, lowlands, and we can kind of decide the influence. So if we just open up the colors, you can see what each biome has in terms of its color. So we have the rainforest, which is green. We have the seasonal forest. So if I change this to say something obvious like purple, you can see our tropical season forest is placed here. And then we can just update the influence. So if I reduce the lowlands, we're not going to get much of the seasonal forest. And if I bring this down, you can see we're instantly going into higher territory, which is snow. So super useful to just use this node, apply the colors that you want, and then just play around with these values to push your terrain into a new biome. And then you have loads of options here. So the scale, we can apply water to show where the water body would be, and just mess around with the sea level. And again, depending on the sea level, going from ocean all the way to a marsh or a lake. So depending on your need and the end result you're going for, some of these nodes will be useful, but for me personally, I prefer the sat map and mixer option. Those are normally what I stick to. I prefer the control that it provides. But lately I've been taking the high map, throwing it into Substance Painter, and just using the smart masks in there to quickly texture my terrain in this kind of procedurally textured in that sense, and much more quicker to export, etc. So we're near the end. Right now we have this textured terrain. So in the next and final video, we're just going to go through how to actually use the build functionality and get our terrain files, such as the albedo, maybe the normal, and even the mesh. So hope this video was useful for you guys, and I'll see you on the next one.